Imagine living in a world where defying authority could cost you not only your freedom, but subject you to punishments so horrifying they seem like something out of a nightmare. Welcome to the reality of the British Empire as justice system, a time when the law was enforced with ruthless efficiency and creativity. In this video, we re-diving into the most disgusting and unimaginable punishment methods used by the British Empire, practices that were as much about control as they were about cruelty, from brutal whippings to public spectacles of death. We'll uncover the dark side of history that few dare to discuss. So are you ready to explore a past where justice wasn't just served, it was inflicted? Stick around to learn about punishment methods so extreme they shaped the very fabric of the British legal system and left an indelible mark on history. The British Empire's ruthless legal code. At the heart of the British Empire's draconian punishment methods lay its stringent legal framework known as the Bloody Code. During the 18th and early 19th centuries, this legal system included over 200 crimes punishable by death. Crimes as minor as stealing bread or pickpocketing could result in execution. This approach to justice was rooted in the belief that fear would deter crime, an idea eloquently summarized by the philosopher Jeremy Bentham, who once said, "The greatest happiness of the greatest number is the foundation of morals and legislation." While critics within the empire, such as William Wilberforce, questioned the morality of such measures, the legal code persisted for decades. This harshness was not confined to England, but extended across the colonies, often with additional layers of severity imposed to control the native populations. The infamous Cat o' Nine Tails. Cat o' Nine Tails stands out as one of the most infamous tools of corporal punishment within the British Empire, particularly in the Navy and penal colonies. This whip, composed of 9 knotted cords, was designed to inflict maximum pain while ensuring the recipient remained alive to endure the punishment. Sailors accused of insubordination or convicts in penal colonies such as Australia were often subjected to the Cat o' Nine Tails, which symbolized not just discipline but the absolute authority of the empire. The punishment itself was a spectacle, often carried out in front of peers to serve as a warning. Each lash of the whip tore through the skin, leaving deep, agonizing wounds. Those who survived would bear the scars for life, a physical reminder of their submission to imperial rule. The British Navy, notorious for its strict discipline, recorded cases where flogging sessions extended to dozens or even hundreds of lashes, depending on the severity of the offense. In many instances, medical officers stood by to ensure the victim did not succumb to their injuries prematurely, allowing the punishment to continue. Historical accounts from penal colonies reveal that the Cat o' Nine Tails was often used with extreme severity. Those sentenced to flogging were tied to a frame to prevent movement, ensuring that the punishment was carried out as intended. Public hangings were a central feature of the British Empire's justice system, serving both as a method of execution and as a grim form of public spectacle known as justice on display. These events drew crowds numbering in the thousands, transforming the punishment of criminals into a macabre form of entertainment. Convicts sentenced for crimes ranging from theft to murder were often executed in marketplaces, city squares, or near the scenes of their alleged misdeeds, ensuring that the event had maximum impact on local communities. The process itself was drawn out to heighten its deterrent effect. The condemned were paraded through the streets, often in shackles, before being brought to the gallows. A clergyman would deliver last rites, and the executioner would read aloud the crimes of the accused to remind spectators of the justice being served. However, death by hanging was not always instantaneous until the introduction of the long drop method in the 19th century, which was designed to break the neck quickly. Victims often suffered a prolonged and agonizing death by strangulation. The spectacle of hanging was intended to enforce the social order, yet it often had the opposite effect, as described by contemporary observers like Charles Dickens. He argued that such events dehumanized both the condemned and the spectators, fostering an atmosphere of cruelty rather than respect for the law in some cases. Public hangings backfired entirely, transforming criminals into folk heroes. This was particularly true of figures like Jack Sheppard, whose daring escapes and defiance of authority captivated the public imagination even as he met his fate at the gallows by the late 19th century. Public executions were abolished in Britain, moving behind prison walls as part of broader reforms to the justice system. Execution by firing squad. Execution by firing squad was a method employed in the British Empire primarily reserved for soldiers convicted of desertion, mutiny, or cowardice. It represented a grim combination of discipline and public humiliation meant to deter others from similar transgressions. Unlike other forms of execution, it was often carried out in military settings, reinforcing the rigid hierarchy and expectations of loyalty within the armed forces. The process was methodical. The condemned was typically blindfolded and tied to a post or seated in a chair while a line of soldiers aimed their rifles to alleviate the burden of guilt for those carrying out the sentence. One rifle was usually loaded with a blank round, ensuring no individual knew who fired the fatal shot. Notable instances of firing squad executions occurred during times of war, particularly during World War I. Records indicate that hundreds of British soldiers faced this fate, accused of desertion or disobedience under the immense strain of trench warfare. Critics argue that many of these men suffered from undiagnosed psychological conditions like shell shock, now recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. Despite these controversies, the British military justified the practice as a necessary measure to maintain discipline in the chaos of war. The scavenger's daughter. Although not as widely utilized as other methods of punishment in the British Empire, the scavenger's daughter was an infamous torture device associated with the Tower of London, known for its horrifying method of inflicting pain through compression. Named after its creator, Leonard Skevington, a lieutenant of the Tower under Henry VIII, the device was designed to crush the body into a position of unbearable contortion. The victim was forced into a kneeling posture with their head, hands, and legs tightly bound by an iron framework. As the mechanism was tightened, it compressed the body inward, causing excruciating pain and often leading to severe internal injuries. Used primarily on political prisoners and those accused of treason, the scavenger's daughter was a counterpart to the rack, which stretched the body. Where the rack pulled joints apart, the scavenger's daughter crushed them together, often breaking bones and causing severe internal bleeding. What makes the device particularly chilling is its psychological effect. Unlike more public punishments, the scavenger's daughter was often used in private, adding a layer of isolation to the victim's suffering. This secrecy heightened its impact, as prisoners feared not only the physical pain, but also the uncertainty of their fate. Accounts of those who survived its use are scarce, likely due to the severity of the injuries inflicted. Drawing and quartering. Drawing and quartering was one of the harshest punishments in British history, reserved for those convicted of high treason. It was designed to send a powerful message of deterrence, carried out in public to emphasize the consequences of defying the crown. The process began with the condemned being tied to a horse and dragged to the site of execution, a humiliating spectacle intended to degrade the accused in front of the public. At the execution site, the individual was hanged but not to the point of death, ensuring they remained conscious. This was followed by acts of dismemberment, with the body being divided into 4 parts, quartered. These remains were often displayed in prominent locations, such as city gates, as a stark warning to others. This punishment was emblematic of the Crown's authority and the severity of treason. While this method was used from the 13th century and reached its height during the Tudor period, public opinion eventually began to shift. By the late 18th century, the practice was increasingly viewed as barbaric, leading to its abolition in 1870. It is hard to imagine a more brutal and degrading punishment than this, designed not just to kill, but to humiliate and destroy the body of the traitor as a warning to others. Transportation to colonies. Transportation to overseas colonies was one of the British Empire's most significant forms of punishment, used extensively between the 17th and 19th centuries. Rather than executing or imprisoning criminals indefinitely, the authorities opted to send them across the seas to remote territories like Australia, the Americas, and later Bermuda and Van Diemen's Land. This punishment served dual purposes. It rid Britain of its unwanted criminal population while providing labor to develop its colonial holdings. The journey itself was often a punishment. Convicts were crammed into overcrowded ships for months, enduring appalling conditions that included disease, malnutrition, and abuse. Records show that mortality rates on these voyages were high, with some ships losing a quarter or more of their passengers before reaching their destination. Upon arrival, the situation rarely improved. Convicts were auctioned off or assigned to work on farms, infrastructure projects, or as domestic labor, often enduring harsh treatment and long hours. Transportation was not without its critics. Reformers in Britain argued that the practice was inhumane and did little to rehabilitate offenders. By the mid-19th century, rising opposition, along with the changing dynamics of Britain's empire, led to the decline of transportation as a punishment, pressing to death. Pressing to death, known as peine forte at jour, was one of the most brutal forms of punishment, used in the British legal system during the medieval and early modern periods. This method was employed against those who refused to enter a plea in court. The punishment involved laying the accused on their back, placing a wooden board on their body, and gradually adding heavy stones or weights. The increasing pressure caused unbearable pain, crushed the chest, and often led to a slow, agonizing death if the individual did not relent. The deliberate cruelty of this method was intended to compel submission, but some chose to endure the ordeal rather than plead. One notable case is that of Margaret Clitheroe in 1586. A devout Catholic in York, England, who refused to enter a plea when charged with harboring Catholic priests during a time of Protestant rule under Elizabeth I. To protect her family from being implicated and avoid the confiscation of her property, Clitheroe chose silence. For her defiance, she was subjected to pressing. Witnesses recounted that her body was crushed under a door loaded with heavy stones, and she died after approximately 15 minutes. Her steadfastness later led to her canonization as a Catholic saint in 1970. This punishment, while relatively rare, symbolized the harsh extremes of medieval justice. Pressing to death fell out of favor over time as attitudes towards such brutal practices shifted, and it was officially abolished in 1772. The punishments of the British Empire's past. The punishments of the British Empire stand as stark reminders of how far societies have come and how far they once went in the name of law and order. These practices, though horrifying, reflect the unrelenting grip of power and the brutal consequences of defiance. But they also beg the question, what would you have done in their place? Could you have endured the lash of the cat o' nine tails or the crushing weight of peine forte at jour? Let us know in the comments what you found most shocking about these grim methods. And don't forget hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more deep dives into the shadowy corners of history. After all, history teaches us not only about the past but also about the resilience of the human spirit. Let's keep exploring it together.